So we're going to keep it going. You know, obviously it's the end of the day, and let's have our next group come out. We've got Boardroom's Randa Williams.
Hey, everyone.
Rob Master, the head of the collective, and obviously everyone probably knows him from his Unilever days here. Brooks Bollinger, former University of Wisconsin quarterback in New York Jets and Minnesota Vikings, and the great Kim Kelleher, the president of AMC and chief of revenue. So thank you.
Well, how are you all today?
Doing great. Exciting session. I think it's a great kickoff from Mitchell. I think we're living through an unbelievable, exciting time in college sports, so just excited to be here.
So when Lance was talking, he talked about the Varsity Collective here and there, but he didn't say exactly what it is. What in the world is the Varsity Collective?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the Varsity Collective really is about a group of alumni, Badger fans, or any university's fans, and in our case, which is really important, former student athletes, coming together as an independent entity, that's part of the NCAA rules, to support the student college athlete in this totally new environment. And I think, you know, a big focus for us is we're supporting all 800 athletes, 23 teams. And this is not just, it's not just one sport, it's not just the football team or the men's basketball team, it's across the sports. I think if we think about like that vision of like this group of like people rallying around the student athlete, it's focused in two areas. One is to really maximize this opportunity. This is a moment in time for the student athlete to take advantage of this, of profiting off their name, image, and likeness, through charitable partnerships, through other business organizations. And so that's one. So how do we help prepare and educate them to take advantage of that opportunity? And the other part of it is we recognize that, you know, we're distinguishing ourselves because we want to help equip the student athlete for, frankly, life after college.
Right.
Because this is a moment in time, it's 4, maybe 5 years, and so how do we provide them a unique experience, leveraging and tapping our engaged alumni network? So to think about them as a holistic student athlete and like a whole person.
So we have two members of your alumni network here.
That's right,
Brian
that's
and
right.
Kim. How did both of you all, Kim, I'll start with you. How did you get involved with the Wisconsin Varsity Collective?
Well, Rob's very hard to say no to for anyone in the room who knows Rob, but honestly, it was more from, frankly, a corporate perspective in that I loved what the collective was talking about, more than just talking about the athlete part of the student athlete. They were talking about the whole athlete, and there's a component of the Varsity Collective that I think really makes it stand out. It's called the life currency component, and everyone talks about the 2% of athletes that go on and become pros. That means 98% go on and become pros in something else. And as an executive in media, I've always tried to hire from my alma mater and big universities, but to hire a student athlete from one of these places is kind of the holy grail. I think that they've navigated a lot, and then when they're now with the new rules through Varsity Collective, they now have an entity through the collective that cares about their whole selves. So my favorite part of the life currency piece is the fact that I'm teaching one of the courses about professionalism and leadership in a corporate environment. These are tools that I actually don't think were offered to a lot of the athletes in the past. That's just one. Rep yourself, how you actually come across on social media, the importance of actually maintaining your brand or building your brand. These are things that, you know, most people stumble through and figure out along the way,
Right.
Usually after a mistake. The collective is here to actually help them navigate that through and use that into what's going to help them in life.
Brooks?
Yeah, I learned through multiple mistakes, not just one, but the short answer is Rob told me to, so I accepted, but I really looked at it through the lens of the student athlete, and having lived that, and then I was also a college football coach, so I understood that for all these years there's been this huge wall in between the student athlete and the companies and the network of alumni that can support them. And this was a great opportunity for that wall to come down and make their futures real. And the narrative around it as it rolled out was all about today's dollars. How can you finally get paid? How can you capture that revenue today? And you can see by the gray hair, now I'm old and I have 5 kids and I'm working a normal job. And I wish I knew then what I know now. So to try and be able to make that real and share that with the student athletes was very important to me.
And so you just said you're old and gray hair, but obviously the Varsity Collective was nowhere near existence when you were in school. How could it have helped you when you were in school?
Well, I think about, I don't like to think about how much money I would have gotten, because now I look at it, you start counting
Take a
dollars.
guess.
Yeah.
I think, just to be clear, he was a 4-year starting quarterback.
Right.
Like, he won a Rose Bowl. I mean,
Would have been a darling.
I had, my good friend told me, he said, you weren't very good, but you were on ESPN every day for 4 years straight, or every Saturday for 4 years straight, so nobody can forget your name. But yeah, I had the gift of longevity, or the benefit of longevity. We won the Rose Bowl early and didn't get back, but maybe a few $100,000. And I can tell you, I would have had no idea not only how to deal with this functionally of living up to my end of the bargain, dealing with the money and everything that goes with it, but I wouldn't have had an idea of how to think about how I'm positioning myself in the marketplace, right? I would have been thinking about things like, okay, how do I get a moped, right? I need to deal with the scooter shop so I can get a free moped. Those of you from Madison know that's the deal. How do I get a couple deals with some local establishments so we can have fun on Saturday nights with my teammates? I would have been thinking about that lens in the here and now. And I think the next layer of this that's so important is it's easy to look at these guys on TV and say, oh, they got people around them, they got it figured out. These kids are going to class 5 days a week. They're not pro athletes yet, right? They're still kids. They still have all the social pressures, academic pressures, time pressures that go along with it. And I think that's so critical to help them navigate and think through how to think about this to the long term.
So Rob, I want to go back to you now.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with NIL to start? Because as they alluded to before us, the NIL's very much so the Wild Wild West right now.
Yeah.
And everyone's trying to rep somebody.
Yeah.
What was your journey?
So for me, at Unilever, where I just actually stepped down after a 20-plus year career there, we were an NCAA sponsor for a decade plus. And we always kind of watched that NCAA partnership and realized that we're writing a big check, obviously, to media companies, NCAA, and we recognized that kids were not being part of that. And so we were watching that closely, like a number of big advertisers and sponsors. So when they passed legislation that said kids can profit from name, image, and likeness, we were actually the first major company that was ready and armed to launch a program. So we launched a program with our brand Degree. And it wasn't about like hawking deodorant and how great the scents are or how the staying power of dry protection. It was really about our purpose. And I think we heard it before, like these kids have amazing stories. And the thing is, college athletes are influencers.
Right.
They don't know it yet. And so we actually started this July 1st of last year, like the day it was announced, we picked over a dozen athletes. And we really based it on the stories they can tell. And so we worked with each individual student athlete, and it wasn't just about like, we're gonna pay you for a transaction. We met every single kid via Zoom, talked about their story, talked about their journey. We had a wheelchair basketball player from Alabama. We had a couple of Wisconsin people, of course. We had a quarterback from Nebraska whose mother had passed away. And he shared his journey of adversity and how he broke limits. That was the theme of the campaign. So this was a space that I had an enormous passion for. And I just saw the unbelievable opportunity to work with these kids. And so we did it again this next year. And so part of it was I'm also an adjunct professor at the school.
Right.
I teach a class there. So while I was there going back and forth, I had an opportunity to meet the athletic department and just share, here's the journey that we're doing, here's what we're doing kind of NIL. And it wasn't just about the transaction, it was so much more about the purpose, how they get involved in the community, how mentorship. And it really felt like that was like the Wisconsin way. And I know it sounds a little bit corny, but that's really the truth. And so there was a lot of interest in talking to guys like Brooks to say that's how we should do it. So we took a little bit of that playbook and we brought it to Wisconsin about mentorship, about preparation for life, about kind of charitable and community engagement. And that's really what I got involved with it.
So you mentioned the word influencer there, and I'm sure each one of you can answer this question, but I wonder, how do you brand yourself as an athlete? And Brooks, you can speak to it because you were an athlete. And Kim, from your perspective, you're hiring people who are former athletes because not everybody goes to the NFL, NBA, WNBA. How do you all advise athletes to brand themselves, A, as influencers, and B, to get in corporate America?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say is Rob just mentioned I think there's always been this connection to the community and giving back. And I think if you think about that through the lens of the student athlete, and I can say as being there, it was something you did, it felt good, and you did it for the right reasons, but you were checking a box based on what somebody else decided.
Right.
And you just think how powerful that shift is when all of a sudden, now I have some way that I can intentionally give in a different way, eyeball to eyeball, and I'm taking ownership of that. So I think that's the start of how you brand yourself. And I think what's so important, why they need guidance is first of all, we talk about it in branding, right? Well, a lot of these guys, and I've dealt with a lot of NFL players, and I lived it. I'm figuring it out when I was 35. It's identity, really. So you think about this, what they do on the field has defined them since they're sometimes 9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
Even younger.
It's really hard to pull a kid outside of that in real time, and some of us, it takes till you're much older. So I think what's so fascinating about this is just to get them down the path and make it real is now you can lead to these much more fundamental, foundational conversations, because you all know if there's no foundation underneath that and you don't know who you are, it's hard to build this brand around it. So I think that process and having people to guide you through it doesn't happen overnight, but I think that the pieces are in place, if guided properly, to really help these kids understand where they're sitting.
Kim, what's your take? Because when Brooks was in school, he couldn't have an internship. His resume was practically empty except for college football quarterback. When someone comes to you and says, I want to work for AMC, but they're an athlete, what do you say to them to maybe get them in the building?
Well, I feel like if they can navigate, over 85% of college athletes either work a full or part-time job to stay in school and just to afford expenses. And the opportunity, it's funny, I feel like there's a lot of discussion about the money aspect of what this can bring. It may bring a lot of money to a few, but if it can bring a little money to many, that is game changing. To graduate without debt, to graduate not kind of behind the 8 ball, to be able to actually maybe not work 30 hours a week, go to school, and be an athlete, that alone actually not only enhances the opportunity for them to be an incredible athlete and best in class at their game or sport.
Absolutely.
I try to think about it really broadly, and that's another thing I love about the Varsity Collective. It is about the 800 athletes we're supporting, not just the most obvious. It's really, if we can help all of them a little bit, we're off to the races. But when it comes to hiring, I mean, if you can balance that at 18 to 22 years old or whatever the case, I would love to work with you, and I think probably everyone in this room would love to work with you. These are, and maybe there's many athletes in this room, like you've got it going on. If you can do that at 18, and I'd take that resume any day of the week.
Rob,
Can I add? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I lived it, and I can tell you what they say. They say, go get some experience, right? I won the Rose Bowl when I was 19 years old, and I was in a bunch of room with a bunch of people that are like, hey, we'll hire you someday, And then you get done playing, it's like, hey, this is great, but you need to start somewhere, right? And it is, I think, especially at the sports that are probably a little higher profile, get a little more coddled, a little more done for them, it's a lot harder to bridge that gap because they haven't had to hustle. We haven't had to figure it out for ourselves. So that concern is real. I'm not blaming the employers for it. But I think that's why this is so monumental if we harness it the right way.
Rob, I want to ask you something in reference to that. You have a completely different challenge because Brooks was an athlete and we have an exec at the end. But for you, you have a challenge of getting NIL deals and also advising these students, hey, you may not go to the NBA or wherever the athlete's professional league is, but here's what you can do.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to that. I just want to comment on some of the notes that Brooks talked about, which is like these influencers. Like that's the thing. I've spent my career thinking about how do we market our brands to consumers, and that's the thing. Influencers is a huge opportunity, and so these are 18 and 20-year-old kids, and so one of the big things that we're doing, like money aside, as Kim said, we're preparing them to think about how to become an influencer. So we're bringing in, and it's great because we have such a big Badger alumni network. So and we have a woman, Allie, from TikTok here today. She's from TikTok. She's a Badger. We have someone from Meta, Badger, Twitter, Badger. And they're actually coming in. We have this whole program called Certified Social, we're going to help certify our student athletes to understand how to optimize and leverage their personality, experience, lifestyle on the social platform. So that's like part of the experience we want to offer. And by the way, it's also like, these are kids getting contracts. So if you like, I barely can like look at a contract now, much less when I was an 18-year-old kid. And so we're doing programming. We're bringing in lawyers to help them X's and O's of NIL contracts. We're bringing in fashion and stylists, all Badgers, by the way, of our alumni base, to help understand, like, what's your fashion, what's your style, how do you present yourself? And these, I think, are really important components of preparing them, not just for like the NIL, but frankly for life after college.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a big part of it. And so the other part we asked around deals is, I think, it goes back to that. It's like, and Brooke said, it's like, it used to be like you did something because like the coach or the organization that like told you go for this charity. Now it's really working with the kids to say what matters to you. What are charities or organizations or brands that matter to you, and helping really advise and guide them to find who they are, being authentic, and then go and promote and tie in with those types of organizations. So that's kind of how we're doing. In the end, we're not an agent. We're here to help, first and foremost, support the student athlete, and that could take all kinds of shapes.
And so now I want to go to a broader view. We've heard different coaches, if you all follow athletes, then you know this, or college athletics. There are a couple coaches out there who have come to their alumni base and said, hey, I need X amount of dollars to keep my team together. You're going to do that or this team's going to fall apart. And that's after putting billion-dollar buildings together for these same athletes. What is the difference between the Wisconsin Varsity Collective from some of the other schools who have alumni bases that are garnering NIL deals and different things like that?
So I'll do a quick thing, and then these guys. I think part of it is, listen, we recognize this is the reality of college sports. So we're certainly going to be competitive. We have a huge alumni base, nearly 500,000 people, very active, very engaged in all the big cities of Chicago, New York, LA, huge footprint around the country. So there's no question, we know we can get our alumni involved, raise the money, and be competitive in that space. But really, this is about differentiating ourselves. And I think that's all the other stuff that we frankly spent the first 20 minutes talking about. Not the deals, NIL deals and the cash. It's about life currency and certified social and helping prepare them for when after college or after even the NFL. So that's a big part. That's, I think, the big differentiator for us is we're going to be competitive in that space, but we see a much more holistic approach to this NIL space.
You mentioned life currency. I know, Kim, that you have a lot to do with that. What is life currency?
It's exactly what we've been talking about, what Rob mentioned before. I think it's a series. It's a well-baked. We have actually over 12 different courses that we're going to be working with.
It's a class.
It's a class.
Okay.
It's a class. But the class is always in session. So no, truly, it's the kind of thing. It's more of a resource is probably the best way to describe it. Yes, there will be a formalized opportunity for the student athletes to participate, but it's ongoing from there. I think. And actually, it's beyond the student athlete. It's their families. It's who needs to understand the contracting, like Rob was talking about, or understanding their presence on social, or understanding the transition from your senior year into corporate America. This is also an incredible opportunity for introductions, for internships, and for actual opportunity out of there, so people who look at you don't say you have nothing on your resume.
I just jump in, to give you specific examples. It's we have programming, because here's the thing. I started calling alumni, and part of this was people, finance, social work, lawyers. These are all the kind of life currency, which, by the way, we've trademarked. We've trademarked the term.
Wow.
Pending approval, but it's with the U.S. government. So this concept of taking the currency just beyond the commercial transaction, and so I just stopped calling people, because every person I called, from Hollywood showrunners to hedge fund managers to advertising executives, they were all I'm in. Sign me up, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to kind of engage and support the student athlete. So that's kind of a big part of the programming.
So now, each of you advise these athletes in a different way, and your advice comes from different perspectives. What sort of advice are you giving to athletes, and does it depend on the athlete?
Yeah, so you can start, yeah.
I mean, I think it goes in the name, right? The collective, right? I see our jobs as much as listening and understanding as layering in the right resources to surround them, right? The saying, it takes a village, I think one of the things that's so hard when you're sitting in that seat and you say, hey, it's not that hard, they have all these resources, but these kids don't know who to trust, right?
Definitely.
They're going, okay, even when they go upstairs in the coach's office, they're going, well, are they doing what's best for the institution? Are they doing what's best for me? And there's layers to it, right? This is still a team sport. Well, football is, I'm speaking to, but most of them are team sports. So even within that, as I'm building my personal brand and gaining these opportunities, if we're doing this right, they're thinking about not just what is my personal brand, how does this reflect the brand of our team, our program, our institution, our community? And that's what's so important to us. And let's be honest, it takes discipline, and it's going to take resources to build that funnel and take the long view, because the world is going 1,000 miles an hour, and it's all about here and now. So I think finding that balance and really just listening to them and building the proper resources around them, because it's going to evolve.
And just, it's interesting because Brooks, obviously former NFL
Right.
player, but the other part is we've engaged all these like legendary Wisconsin athletes. Again, it was like we had to stop calling people, because whether it be J.J. Watt, Russell Wilson, Michael Finley, like the list goes on. Dana Recchi, who was like
Jonathan
the
Taylor.
All-American. Like every single one of these guys was like, I'll come back, I'll talk to the students, I'll share my journey, I'll give like my tips. And it's over and over, they're all like build your relationships, be nice to people. It's not all about like what's it like on the fast lane of being a professional athlete. I think these guys all take a different angle. And so, the students can't wait to hear from guys like J.J. Watt or Russell Wilson, but also people like, Sarah Nursing, who's like, or Dana Recchi, like, who have different angles and experiences based on like playing women's sports or playing in Europe.
Kim, you mentioned that life currency is a never-ending class. That means the advice is also endless. What do you say to athletes?
Well, we haven't had our first class yet.
It's next week.
It's next week. But I feel like what I will probably do is not speak to them much different than I would speak to the young people coming into the organization now. Just more about what to expect. I feel like with the student athletes right now, so much of their advisory is about their sport specifically. And I keep going back to 98% of these athletes are not going to continue their sport in a professional way after college. So they are going to be those entry-level positions. They are coming very quickly, and they have not been on the exact same journey at the level they're competing at as other students. They just aren't. They were very, very focused, and maybe Brooks is the best person to talk about this, but they were very, very focused not only on their academic, but also their sport. Not necessarily the next in the same way. You look at young people today, their internships start in high school. They're tracking towards a professional life much earlier and earlier. I feel like actually what we're going to talk about is what to expect. What next? And it may be actually even going back a little bit to go forward with them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I just had the conversation with a kid the other day in high school sports. He got cut and he didn't know what to do, right? And I said, sometimes the best thing in life and where we learn our lessons is when you have to pivot and start making intentional decisions about where you're going. And I've seen that over and over again. And the reality is a lot of these, the more successful they are, the less they've had to do that in their life. And some of them don't have to do it till the day they're going into the NFL Hall of Fame or whatever and their career ends. And I think that's what's so important about this is, I remember I was recruiting at Pitt, I was coaching college football, and a kid showed up, he got a scholarship, he kicked his feet up on the desk, and he's like, I made it. What are you talking about? You haven't even started yet. He's like, well, my whole life, this was my purpose. This is what everybody told me. Just get your scholarship and you're good. I'm like, dude, you've been lied to, okay? This is just beginning, and it's going to change 5 more times, and we got to figure this out. I don't care if you get a scholarship. I don't care if you sign $1 million NIL deal. I don't care if you sign a $100 million NFL contract. This is all important. This is who you are, and this will never change. And I think the hard thing is there's always been good people in institutions that have been trying to tell kids that, but it's hard, right? And what this does, and why this is so important that we do it the right way, is that this makes it real, and we can get to them at a different point. I've worked with plenty of professional players that are in the middle of their NBA or NFL career, and they still haven't thought about any of this, right? And their life is very much impacted by that fact. It's like their development as a human paused when they were 17 years old because they got that scholarship in their hand, and then they pushed them down a track. That's as sad to me as a kid that can't go find a job. And that's why, Again, not to beat the drum, but that's why I'm so passionate about. We have to do this the right way. It's too important.
Before I open it up to questions, did you want to add anything, Rob?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, because you asked Brooks about, and having gone to school there, like how much he would have made. Like, I'm curious, like, what brands, like, what would have been some of your sponsorships?
He's from North Dakota, for anybody that doesn't know. So,
Any North Dakota people in here today? Oh, dang, we're not big in the ad world. We got a good brand though. It's solid. Like I said earlier, I wouldn't even have known how to think about that other than what was important to me at that time. I will say what we haven't talked a ton about that's so critical. We talked a little bit about the charitable component. We went to the Children's Hospital every week and being able to start there, right, with purpose. And the other thing that's so fun about this, and you guys, this is what you do, and you guys are all geniuses at this, but we haven't even scratched the surface of what's possible.
Right.
I mean, if I had a bobblehead of me today, and that was going around, I could show my kids what I looked like before gray hair. It'd be nice.
Well, I'm going to open it up to questions. We have about 4 minutes left, so you can stand up, and then I'll repeat your question to the panelists. Right there. Yep.
Well, first off, I'm a Gophers fan, so you can decide if you want to answer the question. But I was just curious, with media coverage of certain sports over others, how do you give equal opportunity to, for instance, women's sports? And just seems like some people have a huge head start with this. So how do you?
So I'll repeat the question for the virtual audience listening. We have a live audience here. We had someone ask, how do you want to say it one more time?
Yeah, I
got it.
So how do we? And I think it's not so much, I guess, like ours, but I talk sports in general. Like men's sports, particularly I guess football and basketball, have a head start just with the platform for exposure versus the women's sports. Did I say that right? Yep. So I think it's a great question, and of course we're not in the business of like doing media deals and those platforms. But what I think actually is really interesting, and I've seen this both on the signing college athletes for degree at Unilever, as well as now on this other side of helping student athletes. I think actually females are much better versed on social media than their male counterparts. And I think whether it be TikTok or Insta or Twitter, the way they kind of bring their personalities and stories to life, I think is much more compelling. And brands see that. So for degree, when we did this, we actually had the same number of male athletes and females, and we actually found that our female athletes actually performed better in large part because they had a distinct understanding of who they were better than the male athletes. And so while the male athletes may be more well known on every day on a Saturday or on the basketball court, in social media, it's an equalizer. So there could be a big athlete who has like 25, 30,000 followers and they're like a quarterback. But then you have like a volleyball player who has like 100,000, who may not, to the average brand person, may not, but like that to me, I think is a big differentiator. So I think it's, the NIL, I think, is actually a great equalizer, particularly the way the format works, because it's not like just doing TV commercials, it's using your social platforms.
Can I just add to that, Rob? I feel like the collectives in media, like Together, and there's new collectives in women's sports in particular that are coming together, and there's power together, and they're joining voices, and they're using the social platforms to amplify that. I was the former publisher of Sports Illustrated back in the day before social media was what it was, and I think the problem you're calling out is still very much a problem. It's interesting. I'd call out to all the brand people in the room that the money drives a lot of it. So I feel like doing what Rob did at Unilever in his position there and identifying out of those 10 athletes, 5 are women, 5 are men, and making sure to amplify the stories in an equitable way, that makes all the difference. And I feel like now with this level set, what NIL brings is a level set. A, there's access to everyone now. B, the social platforms, as Rob has called out, that is also a great equalizer. Those are not written by male writers or a male writer room. Those are you. That's the athlete themselves. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for the game to finally start to change.
And thank you for the time today. This is the Wisconsin Varsity Collective, and I'm excited to see where you all go in the future.